They're here. So I would like to start with a story which Taffy gave me. Seems appropriate. Quite some years ago, he told a different version of this story and said, next time we meet, I want to hear Richard York reworking this story about a piper. And so we met, and luckily he gave the thumbs up. So here's another version of it. It's actually set in the era BC, or even the era LBC, long before COVID. Every Thursday, musicians would gather at the old Joiners' Arms. They would walk in from the countryside and the villages round about for something which we are sadly missing at present, musicians especially, an evening sitting in company and playing music. And whoever else turned up, you could be sure of two people being there. There would be the old fiddler who lived in the village, and there would be a piper who used to walk from the other side of the hill, a smallpipes player. Now, in his daily life, this man was a boot and shoemaker, but his passion was for the music. He lived for those moments when the music really came together and the whole room seemed to lift. You'd have sworn that even the beams were dancing. That was what made life worth living for him. And he practiced to make sure that he had all the tunes under his fingers. But if he was really honest with himself, he knew that it wasn't him that drove the music in those sessions. It was the old fiddler. He'd got some fire in his fingers which somehow eluded the piper, try as he would. Until there was one day when he went down to Banbury, it's about 10 miles, for some supplies, when he heard a sound that drew him like a magnet, because there, standing on the steps of the cross, yes, the actual Banbury Cross, it really is there, standing on the steps of Banbury Cross, there was an old man playing pipes, very much like our pipers. The old man was wearing a coat that had seen far better days. And his hair, well, it was even much longer than mine after all these months without a visit to a barber's. But the music he was getting out of the pipes, oh, it was wonderful. The piper didn't even know you could do that with them. There was so much fire and vibrancy. And he paid the old man to play the tune again. And then again, and then again. And I don't know how many times he got the old man to play that tune while he was watching every finger like a hawk. I don't even know how long he spent there, and I can't even tell you if he actually went back home with the things that he'd come to fetch from Banbury. But he had that tune in his head all the way home, and as soon as he got home, it was out with the pipes and he got to work. And most of that night and the next day, he shut up the shop door so that customers wouldn't come and spoil his concentration. And the next day, by next Thursday, he reckoned he'd got it. Not just the tune, but also all those little cuts and grace notes and turns and finger vibrato that makes a tune not just tune, but actually music on the pipes, if you get it right. And he waited his moment in the course of the session when the old fiddler was having a drink, and then he launched into the new tune. And the old fiddler put down his drink, and he smiled, and he nodded. He liked this one. And on the second time through, you might have seen the left-hand fingers just twitching a bit. Derek knows what I'm talking about. And by the third time through, he was playing it. And the trouble was, that was the moment when the whole place lifted off. That was when the fingers began tapping, the feet began tapping. The old fiddler had put the fire into it, not the piper. And he went home in a dark mood that night. So dark that he actually missed a whole load of signs which you as experienced story listeners would have seen as big red flags with flashing lights on them. Midnight, a full moon, a lonely hilltop, an even lonelier crossroads, a theatrically dressed stranger wearing a broad-brimmed hat and a cloak, and as if that wasn't enough, you could see the moonlight shining on his cloven hooves. But when this stranger said, "My poor dear fellow, they don't appreciate your art, do they?" The piper, he was all ears. He didn't see the other stuff. "I do so like an artist who seeks after truth," said the strange man. "An artist who is prepared to make sacrifices for his art. And my friend, you have been doing that. I mean, normally you practice your fingers to the bone to have these tunes right. But I know this week you have not just practiced and practiced, you've actually deprived yourself of the means of putting bread on your table because you've shut the shop door. You've suffered for your art. I respect that. And yet you play the tune, and you know as well as I do, on the third time through, that old fiddler is playing it better than you. Sickening, isn't it? And the piper is nodding. If only you could find that elusive fire. Must be so frustrating. And the piper is nodding. I mean, you've already given up so much. You'd give up a whole lot more for that fire, I bet. And the piper's nodding. You'd sell your very soul for that, wouldn't you? And the piper is nodding. Well, my friend, it so happens, and he produced from under his cloak a scroll. I have the very thing that you need. Every musician's friend, a good contract. And he unrolled it in the moonlight. And the letters seemed to sparkle like fire. "Oh, it's not that bright, I grant you," said this new friend. "Maybe you can't read the smaller bit, but it's just small print. It's a contract. You have to have small print. It's the usual stuff. You get what you want. In return, I have a small consideration. Now, what you get, my friend, if you sign this, is you play all night long. Every note will have the fire in it. They'll be following you. What do you say? All night long." And the piper's nodding. So the gentleman draws out from under his cloak a portable writing desk. "I do like doing things in style," he said, "with a silver inkstand. And when it's flipped open, the blood red ink glitters like fire in the moonlight. And of course, there's a quill pen pressed into the piper's hand. Your moniker there," says the strange man. "Next Thursday night, all night, every note with the fire. What do you say? Sign there, my friend. What have you got to lose?" And the piper does sign. And the letters glow like fire in the moonlight. His friend rolls up the scroll. "Next Thursday," he says. Well, that week went by in a blur. But next Thursday, there he was, and there were all the other musicians and the ones who came to listen as well, sitting in the old joiners, waiting for a good session. Well, he let the fiddler have the first 3 sets. He pretended he was fiddling with the pipes. There's plenty to fiddle with on pipes. And then, 3rd tune, in he came. And that was when the whole thing caught fire. That was when people didn't just tap their fingers, they were thundering away with the fingers and the feet. They were smiling. The old couple who sat by their table, there wasn't a bar in this pub, they were nodding and smiling. It was wonderful. Everything going for him. They played all the tunes they knew. They played all the tunes that only he and the fiddler knew. They played a few tunes that only he knew, and the rest sort of clung on somehow. And the evening went on, and still the people were following every note, until in the end the landlady said, well, it's long past my bedtime, and off she went. And some of the ones who had to go to work early in the morning, well, they trickled out. And then eventually it was just the piper still playing as if his life depended on it, and the landlord and a handful of others. And at last the landlord said, well, boys, my bedtime too, but I can trust you. There's a pot on the table there. If you fetch yourself a drink, just put something in for me, will you? Key in the lock on the door, last one out, lock the door, put the key back under the door. Good night to you all. And off he went. Yes, it really was that sort of pub. And the landlord went to sleep with the sound of the pipes still in his ears. And from time to time during the night he woke up, convinced he could still hear the sound of pipes. The next morning he came down, and it all seemed quiet. Yep, everything in place. White-bordered partitions, the tables, the benches, the stools. There was the pot. Oh, bless them. They put some money in here, a couple of IOUs. He knew who that would be. And the key in the door. The key in the door, not on the floor under it. But the piper had gone to sleep on his stool. And the landlord turned to look in the piper's corner, and that was when he saw it. A great black scorched zigzag straight down the wall, right through the charred remains of the piper's stool. Now the pub has changed. Liz and I were there in the 1970s, and it really was as I described to you, and the landlord and landlady did sit at a table. There wasn't a bar. He went down to the tap room to fetch you drinks. We went back a few years later to look. There's a bar there now. They've ripped everything out, but because it's a country pub, they've been to the cellar of country artifacts, and they've put country artifacts so that you know it's a countryside pub. But they can't get rid, no matter how many times they paint over it, they can't get rid of that great black zigzag down the wall. Thanks for the story, Taffy. There you go.